shall we continue? Okay, so now we've gone through what I call the basic constituents, a basic outline of the Dhamma theory. Now I come to what is called the attribute Matica. You remember the word Matica we had this morning. It's an outline or way of classifying things. And the whole Abhidhamma is constructed on the basis of a rather complex Matica that we find at the beginning of the first work in the canonical Abhidhamma, the beginning of the Dhammasangani. And that Matica is built up of, it's a scheme of 122 categories, which are divided into two sets. One set is called, we call triads, which means a set of 3 terms. The other set, or the other group, are called dyads, sets of 2 terms. Okay, so now to give some examples of each, and they get pretty complicated, but I took some of the simpler and more basic ones. So we have the first triad is really the main one that determines the development of the the first chapter in the Dhammasangani. The distinction of wholesome, unwholesome, indeterminate. That's neither wholesome nor unwholesome. So some dhammas are unwholesome, some dhammas are wholesome, some are unwholesome, some are indeterminate. Then there are different kinds of feelings, and so there are dhammas, some associated with pleasant feeling, some with painful feeling, some with neutral feeling. Then there are some qualities that are to be eliminated by the first stage of enlightenment, which is called stream entry. And in stream entry, one sees the truth of the Dhamma. And with that, certain Dhammas are eradicated. Others are to be abandoned after one gains stream entry by continuing to cultivate the path. Those are the Dhammas to be eliminated by the second, third, and fourth stages of enlightenment. And then there are other Dhammas that are not to be abandoned in either way. You don't have to worry about getting these things in detail. I'm just trying to show you how the scheme of triads is used. Okay, then there's a triad of limited Dhammas. Those are the phenomena of normal sensory experience. Then there's exalted Dhammas. Those are the phenomena that occur with the attainment of the jhanas and the formless meditations. And then there are what are called the measureless or immeasurable Dhammas. Those are the phenomena that occur with the attainment of the world-transcending, supramundane paths, fruits, and nibbana. So those are just a few examples of triads. Then the dyads, they're usually set out as simple affirmation and negation. So there are some dhammas that are roots. What are the dhammas that are roots? I'm sure you know them. Greed, hatred, and delusion.
And in the Sobhana ones, there's non-greed, non-hatred.
Yeah, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So those are the roots. Then there are other dhammas that are not roots. Then to show you how they develop these dyads in a complex way, there are dhammas that have roots, dhammas that don't have roots, dhammas that are connected with roots, dhammas that are not connected with roots. There are dhammas which have conditions, dhammas that don't have conditions, dhammas that are conditioned, dhammas that are unconditioned, visible dhammas, not visible dhammas, dhammas involved in sensory experience, dhammas not involved in sensory experience, dhammas that are material, dhammas that are not material, etc., 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 through 100 of these. And then the Dhammasangani goes through these Matikas in 2 ways. First, there's a chapter 3 which goes through enumerating all of these Dhammas in one way, and then Chapter 4 goes through the same Dhammas in another way. We don't have to be detained by the details here. But this is like some of the value of the Abhidhamma, that it makes heavy use of definition. It attempts to clarify the terminology of the suttas, both by the use of formal definitions, by sutta citations, and by positioning terms in relation to the classes of consciousness. Then I gave an example here of abstract definition. Okay, brings up what is greed. Then it defines it, usually by a list of synonyms. That which is lust, passion, attraction, infatuation, delight and lust, desire, fascination, adhesion, greediness, thorough greediness, and so on, craving. This is called greed. Then sometimes it bases its definitions by citing the suttas, like the definition of Sakkaya Ditthi. Sakkaya Ditthi is the view of self. So it will cite a common passage from the suttas. What is Sakkaya Ditthi, the view of a self? Later we'll say, here the uninstructed worldly person regards form as the self as possessing form is in the self is in form. Same with feeling, perception, volitional activities, consciousness. Okay, this is, I think, all we have to say about the attribute Matica. And now this is like the main theme of the Dhammasangani, what may be the most lasting contribution of the Abhidhamma itself. And that is what I call the typology of consciousness. So already in the Nikayas, we see that there's this analytical treatment of experience. And now the Abhidhamma carries that through in much more detail. So it develops a scheme for classifying all possible occasions of experience, all possible states of mind. And so this scheme is understood to reveal the entire domain of conscious experience, but viewed from a particular angle. It's not intended to be a comprehensive psychology, the way a modern Western psychology might be developed. States that are neuroses, states that are mild neuroses, states of depression, states of bipolar, states of paranoia, states of schizophrenia, whatever. But there's a particular perspective from which states of consciousness are looked at, and this is concerned simply with how these states of consciousness fit into this Buddha scheme of mental development and ultimate liberation. And so here I continue by saying that the concerns of the Buddha's spiritual practice are what determine the contours of this map of consciousness. And so we can simply state the concerns to be threefold. First, how to avoid those states of mind that create unwholesome karma, that result in suffering, that are able to lead to a lower rebirth, and that prolong existence within samsara, the round of rebirths. So that's how to avoid the negative. Then on the positive side, how to nurture wholesome states of mind, the states that generate wholesome karma, states that will lead to happiness here and now and in future states of rebirth, happy states of rebirth. Then the third aim is how to awaken and develop the wholesome states that lead to liberation. These are called the Lokuttara states, the states that transcend the world. Okay, then based on these aims, the Abhidhamma classifies states of consciousness primarily in terms of the triad wholesome, unwholesome, and indeterminate. And I think if you look at an appendix that I have here, this is on page 6 of What's Going On in the Abhidhamma. This will give us a good picture of what's the way the Dhammasangani is classifying states of consciousness. So first it takes the wholesome states of consciousness. And so it has first sensory sphere wholesome states of consciousness. Those are wholesome states that relate to sensory experience. Then we have form sphere wholesome states of consciousness. Those are the states of consciousness that they can occur within the human world through the attainment of the jhanas, but those states of consciousness are typical of the form realm, the realm of subtle form. So those who cultivate the jhanas without going on to develop wisdom are developing the states of consciousness that will lead to rebirth into the form realm, which are exalted realms of, say, divine bliss. Far above our ordinary human realm, even above the sphere of the sensory devas or deities. Then there are the formless sphere, wholesome states of consciousness. Those are the states of consciousness that emerge in what are called the formless meditations. The sphere, the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception. In those states of consciousness, all awareness of form has passed away, and those who develop those states of formless meditations and dwell in them often and become attached to them without using wisdom will tend to take rebirth in the formless realms. Then come the wholesome states of world-transcending consciousness. Those are the states that culminate in liberation, and in the terminology of the Abhidhamma, these are the 4 types of path, supramundane path consciousness. Okay, so the Dhammasangani takes the 4 types of wholesome consciousness first. It enumerates each one individually, enumerates the factors, the mental factors included in those states of consciousness, and defines each of those mental factors. Then comes the unwholesome states of consciousness, of which there are 12. 8 originate from greed, 2 originate from hatred, 8 and 2. And then there are 2 which are rooted in strong delusion without greed or hatred. Whenever there's greed or hatred, underlying the greed and hatred is delusion or ignorance. But there are 2 states of consciousness that can arise without greed or hatred, but just delusion. That's the doubting consciousness and the restless consciousness. Okay, then come the indeterminate types of consciousness. Those are the states of consciousness that are neither wholesome nor unwholesome. And these fall into 2 categories. One are called the results. You see, the way the Abhidhamma understands the working of consciousness, wholesome and unwholesome states of consciousness create karma. And karma matures by creating other states of consciousness which are called the results of karma. And so wholesome states of consciousness belonging to the sense sphere are one type of result. A1 here, it should actually say results of wholesome sense sphere consciousness. Then come results of the wholesome form sphere consciousness, results of the formless sphere consciousness, then the results of the world transcending consciousness, and those are what are called the four fruits of liberation. And then come the results of unwholesome consciousness. Then there are types of consciousness, we call them functional, that they perform some kind of function within a process of consciousness, but they're neither wholesome nor unwholesome. And so I have them classified here: basic functional, functional relating to the sense sphere, functional relating to the form sphere, functional relating to the formless sphere. Again, you don't have to worry about the details, but I'm just laying this out so that you get a picture of the way the Abhidhamma sets itself this project of classifying all states of consciousness. You know, if you want to see these in detail, then you have to read the actual books of the Abhidhamma. And the summary, the Abhidhammata Sangaha, is helpful for getting a broad overview. In my notes, I have some rather detailed points. I don't want to bring those up now, but you can just read those on your leisure. But what I find useful to know, what I try to do is to see how these states of consciousness interrelate with one another. And so I tried to find what I call the three laws that connect states of consciousness. So I say, here I'm on page 4 of the section, What's Going On in the Abhidhamma. Page 4, this is a testimony to my own slip in mindfulness. I have 2 number 5s. It should be number 6. So one is what I call the fixed law of sequence. And this is a law that connects states of consciousness into regular sequences. In the Abhidhamma commentaries, this is called citta viti, which is translated as a cognitive process. And so states of consciousness don't just occur at random, but there's a certain meaningful process to the way the states of consciousness occur. For example, let's take a cognitive process when perceiving a visible form. What happens normally in our day-to-day life is that the consciousness or the mind is continually sinking moment after moment into the state of a kind of subconscious flow. Then now, say, a visible form strikes upon my field of perception. What occurs first is that subconscious flow gets disturbed or shaken. And then the mind starts to emerge out from that subconscious flow. And there comes a moment which is called, again, you don't have to take notes on this, but this is just to illustrate, something called the 5-door inverting citta. It's a state of mind which just turns, something is going on, and so it's turning to one of the 5 sense doors. If I were to see a form, it's turning through the eye door. If I heard like some beautiful music that really was about to catch my attention, it would turn to the ear door. If somebody was cooking some delicious food in the kitchen nearby and the odor came through, it would turn to the nose door, wherever. Okay, so that's 5-door inverting. Wow, my memory. Let's see, 5-door inverting. Okay, then immediately after the 5-door inverting occurs something called the bare sensory consciousness. So I see a form, a moment arises called I consciousness, which just has the function of being aware of the form, but it's a fleeting state of consciousness just going by in a fraction of the snap of a finger. So it just takes in the form. It's followed by something called the receiving consciousness, which receives the impression of the form. Then comes a momentary investigating consciousness, which investigates the form. Again, it's very brief. Then comes a determining consciousness, which determines how to respond to the form. Then comes 7 moments of consciousness in which I'm responding to the form. If it's something, attractive, maybe craving arises for the form. Or it can be a form, say if I see an image of the Buddha, so it will inspire joy. So it's a wholesome series of consciousness accompanied by joy. And then there will occur 2 moments of consciousness which register that impression. So this is just an example of how states of consciousness of specific types occur in these meaningful sequences, and the way particular states of consciousness are tied together in these sequences. This is what I call the fixed law of sequence. And then these are described, these sequences, in a text like the Manual of Abhidhamma. The second law is what I call the mundane law of karma. This is the law that connects certain types of karmically potent consciousness to their respective results or fruits. So if I do something unwholesome, I enjoy going hunting and shooting deer and rabbits. So this is unwholesome consciousness, or those actions are motivated by unwholesome consciousness. And so when I take my gun, go into the woods, shoot, those are unwholesome states of consciousness arising. Then they arise, they create unwholesome karma. The evening I go out with my buddies, we go to the tavern, we drink, we talk, we joke. At night I go back to my family, I've forgotten all about, I brought the animals I killed, I bring them back. We eat them, we just go about enjoying our life. But there are these unwholesome states of consciousness which have created that karma there. And in time, when they meet with suitable conditions, those states of consciousness are going to bring their fruits, their results, which will be experiences of pain and suffering, and if they're strong enough, maybe an unhappy rebirth, a rebirth down in the lower realm. So here I am joking with my buddies in the tavern, we get into a fight, and maybe one of them gets mad at me, shoots me, I die, and maybe a few weeks later, I'm up and about again, and I'm woof, 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 woof. And I see the buddy who shot me, and I go, ruff, 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 ruff. And he's thinking, why is that dog barking at me? Why is he growling at me? Yeah, that's why. And then if I do something good, I give generously, I develop loving kindness, I'm helpful to others, kind to others. Again, I'm creating, in this case, wholesome karma. And so, even though I forget about these deeds and I go about my day-to-day tasks, still that unwholesome karma is there, and when it meets with its conditions, it's going to bring happy or favorable or pleasant results. So it's very important to respect the law of karma, particularly when we're following the Buddha's path. In life after life, we always want to meet the Dharma. And so if we do unwholesome karma, that's sort of cutting off our root connection to the Dhamma. But if one does good, creates good karma, it's strengthening our connection to the Dharma. Okay, the third law is the law that connects certain types of consciousness. These are the world-transcending paths with their own fruits, the results of those paths. And so the chittas, the states of mind in the four paths, eradicate particular types of defilements, and then they're immediately followed by their fruit, in which one experiences the bliss of liberation from those defilements, fetters and bonds. And when one reaches the final fruit, then one experiences the bliss of being liberated from all of the bonds. And now it's interesting, in the Nikayas, the Sutta Pitaka, one doesn't find the idea of path and fruit presented quite in the way it's done in the Abhidhamma. In the suttas, one finds a distinction made between persons who are said to be practicing for the realization of a particular fruit. So there's the person who is practicing for the realization of the fruit of stream entry, the one practicing for the fruit of once-returner, the one practicing for the realization of the fruit of non-returner, the one practicing for realization of the fruit of arhatship. But one doesn't get the impression in the suttas that this is a person who's just going through a one-moment experience. But it's said that such and such a person, or it's said that a donor, somebody who's making an offering, makes an offering to somebody makes an offering of a meal to a person who's practicing for realization of the fruit of stream entry. And one doesn't get the impression that he's putting the food in the monk's alms bowl, and then just for one moment, that monk reaches the path of stream entry, followed immediately by the fruit. But it seems that in the suttas, being practicing for realization seems to be a temporally extended process, and then the fruit seems to be the attainment of that stage itself, attaining the stage of stream entry, the stage of once-returner, the stage of non-returner, the stage of arahat. But in the Abhidhamma, it's said that there arises one moment of path consciousness, which is followed by one moment or 2 or 3 moments of fruition consciousness. So this seems to be a new conception, perhaps based on a finer analysis or a more technical analysis of what is taking place on the occasion of realization. Like in the suttas, they speak about somebody making the breakthrough to the Dhamma. But what is actually going on when one makes that breakthrough to the Dhamma? The suttas don't treat it in any detail. But in the Abhidhamma, one finds that experience of making the breakthrough is dissected into this distinction of a path consciousness and the fruition consciousness. And these two are linked together by this law of liberation, the law that each path consciousness gives rise immediately to its corresponding fruit consciousness. Okay, my notes continue with a few more technical points, which I don't think it's necessary to go into. Maybe we'll open up the floor now to questions. I do suggest if you're interested in getting some detailed illustrations of some of the points I've covered, read the notes in full. But I think I've